Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this morning's episode. I got an hour before I gotta run out of the house. So the title of this morning's episode is "When the Cosmos Remembers Itself," and with a semi-playful intention, I've written "Reasons Beyond Reasons" in the subtitle. And so I'm going to begin like this by saying that when man has thought about his origin has opened up to him in many ways. That means if the mind in this existence is engineered to be designed in a certain way by its environment, by all its conditioning factors, including its parents, including its family, including its friends, including its environment, including everything, every sound that has entered the ear of the being, to every action that has been witnessed by the eye of man, by the eyes of man. So, in some sense, when human beings wonder about their origin, a sort of reverse engineering kind of approach is taken. This reverse engineering kind of approach is very important because ultimately, when we reverse engineer human design, we come to a moment where consciousness is instantaneous. So anything that appears to us as non-local means there is no location to even be a second location or a third location. The phenomenology is there without having a justification to be there, you know. I want to share a certain quote by a man named Swami Krishnananda. This man's wisdom comes to us from Vedic times. Uh, and I was, believe it or not, privileged enough randomly, like I didn't even know. But when I went to India, my ashram was right beside the Divine Life Society ashram. It was called Nikatan ashram. So the Divine Life Society is pretty much where the works of Swami Shivananda, this incredible, this doctor, this like enlightened doctor, you know, you know, became one of the most powerful forces for the yogic mind in modern times. Anyways, Swami Krishnananda tells us that religion is God remembering Himself. Now, what that means is either the reverse engineering towards the origin of of the human conscious design leads us to a point where rather than it's an individual phenomena figuring out me could potentially be collective or other, it's as if suddenly um, it's like a local phenomena realizing it's non-local, or it's a non-local phenomena realizing it's local. I'm going to tell you my own experience. I reverse engineered in some sense. What I mean by that, it's like in a mystical context. What I mean by that is self-inquiring into the nature of who you are. That means finding a moment in this life where there no longer needs to be an escape route. There no longer needs to be a shortcut. It's just you and life. And you have questions and certain things you wonder about as a human being, you'll suddenly notice. You'll suddenly notice that the world is it's an appearance for the mind, but for that appearance, the mind is not an appearance. As I personally reached a point in my psychological self inquiry where I realize that I am not my thoughts, where I realize that thoughts come and go. I can ask the question, who am I, and endlessly give answers to it. So it's not the thought, it's not the thing that wasn't here then is here, is that is the truth of the nature. So eventually anything that changes in the cosmos will lead one to the witness. The witness is a quality of consciousness. Again, I keep emphasizing this because it's very hard to explain. The only way we can explain it really is that it's an instantaneous phenomena. Because it's so instantaneous, it's not again in time. Kind of like regardless of what you do, you're being something. Okay, so regardless of how the thought arises, regardless of how the colors of the world change in your gaze, it's as if like there's something there that remains. Now, consciousness is fascinating because our lives revolve around it, center around it. It's like all my ideology. I was wondering, okay, let's assume that my thoughts and ideas and everything I know has a gravitational orbit. And what would be the center of that gravitational orbit? And then I realized it was attention. When I realized it was attention, that day was a very profound day. That day was a day where I felt I had managed to free my mind from my own conclusions. Most people are trying to conclude something. They're trying to see a truth, find a truth. But guess what? Conclusions, anything you seek in language, it has design, it has an architecture, and what it is people are not just inhabiting houses, they're inhabiting ideology. And an ideology, I tell people treat language like a technology, because then you don't think you are it. Do you know what kind of being you become when you distinguish and discriminate between being a creature of thought and being a creature of attention? To be a creature of attention means you're not ignorant that there is an experience going on here, your experience. Now, you can claim it as your own, or you could claim it as the cosmos. You ask Swami Krishnananda, he'll tell you it's like there's no one looking for God, it's God looking for himself. It is a journey, it is a return to a remembrance of that is too collective to be individual. So therefore, the power cannot be given to an archetype. The experience cannot be ascribed to an archetype. What can be said? We are either something, or we are nothing, or we are the dancer in between. I want to focus on sharing more, sharing much more about this relationship beyond thought that experientially can be attained. And really, if you want to move things in your objective realm, you see that it's evidential. So what it means that if you want to grab a cup from the cupboard, your hand moves instantly, and once your hand is on the cup and you've taken the cup from the cupboard, That's when it's like the intention is manifest. It's an external, like the intention, imagine that moment the person's grabbing the cup, it's an instant. So in some sense we see an instant activation of external embodied expression. Now when it comes to subjective content, there's a couple things that need to be done. First, the mainstream and the culture and the civilization we have built, it is totally ignoring the mind. It has not even cared to encourage people's personal inquiries. The mind is not something that's the same for everybody. Not everybody has the same sort of mind. You know, of course, aside from our genetical differences, we also have differences in our perception. I mean, two people can be seeing the same artwork, but they can see totally different artworks, you know, totally different meanings in the same objective phenomenon, right? So now human beings are beginning to wonder. They're like, all right, I can see this object and my friend can see this object, but these thoughts that I see, can my friend see my thoughts? And then that comes the personal dimension. So the recognition that really to study the mind, you're studying the room which you are only in. This is so crucial. And so I've noticed that they should have taught this in schools, but they don't. Is that there's an objective realm, an objective self. Everybody sees this objective self in the mirror. But then there is a subjective self in a subjective realm. Now, this cannot be seen in the mirror. It is the garb of the one looking. Human design has been invented. We have invented ourselves out of dirt through a sophisticated conscious relationship, as thought and matter in some sense have danced throughout the eons. Man's mind has taken formation. We either see the developments of our intelligence from one dimension, a singular dimension, or we, in some sense, see it from the multidimensional. The way civilization is occupied now, I will say this very boldly, the freshest minds in all our educational systems, they are still fascinated by, I call it the dimensions of 0 and 1. What that means is the species is still puzzled. Did something come from nothing? You know, or in some or in some sense, did nothing come from something, you know? And really, what's going on there is, how would I say it? We are wondering about the origin of intelligence. We feel it popped out of nowhere simply because our consciousness awakens to the world. The psychological subjective realm, yes, it's something from nothing. But the objective reality is not out of nowhere. What that means is one view is, so what I was saying is that the common system, our mainstream is still focused on wondering about, was there nothing or is there something? But I'm saying then it will go to a point where it's going to wonder about, is there one thing, or is there, it's the relationship between the singular and dualistic. Okay, and then the relationship between the dualistic and the infinite multidimensional. I find after you have two dimensions, you can endlessly create endless dimensions. So beyond the number two, infinity is there. So I consider really human beings have to consider um, four dimensions, and I'm not saying this in the scientific way where three dimensions of space and one of time, and time is the fourth dimension in the sense that a person can be in a space at two different times, as if an additional dimension can be considered there. But the thing I'm saying is it's not like that. I'm saying that a dimension is complete absence, then there is a dimension of singular existence. Okay, and then there's a dimension of dualistic existence, and then there's a sort of multidimensional projective ability. So people think that it has to be one of these, or like a certain relationship between these. They either think God is here, man is not here. They either think man is here, God is not here. Do you know? They either think it's only man dimension of the a human dimension, or they think there is there's dual, like there's more dimensions, there's a veil. Ancient cultures acknowledge the sort of veil of thought, a sort of curtain between the realms, you know, like the portal back in the day for sages was like a curtain, you know. And even beyond that, we go to a point of perception where from the dualistic to the infinite means really man, it his objective existence is in a singular dimension. Okay, or let me say it like this: his objective existence is in this is difficult to say. I wanted to say it's between the singular and the dualistic. That means we are an individual, but we can also can acknowledge many individuals. We not only have an ability to be one phenomena, but we can also engage a spectrum of various phenomena, you know, or at least the opposite of what we are being. Any being who can see the opposite of who they are being in the moment, they are conscious. They're subjectively conscious. Their subjective realms is actually in my books highly advanced. That means if you're a person, you go anywhere and you see the opposite of the moment, like you acknowledge what's there, but you also wonder about, like, let's say you see a bad person, and then your mind instantly, the moment it sees their design of bad, also sees the reverse, in some sense the opposite, the symmetrical opposite of it. Do you know? I would like to read some. I want to go into a what I call a quote tunnel, uh, uh, of Immanuel Kant's quotes. Okay, and I believe Kant was a German philosopher. It's very fascinating when you look at philosophers in history. Oh, Prussian German philosopher in the Age of Enlightenment, and his doctrines are transcendental idealism, where he argues that space, time, and causation are mere sensibilities, things in themselves exist, but their nature is unknowable. Yes. All right, let's get into his quotes, guys. Immanuel Kant says all our knowledge begins with the senses, proceeds then to the understanding, and ends with reason. There is nothing higher than reason. So I can see that in his eyes, Immanuel Kant kind of sees that reason is actually the completion of knowledge. And it kind of makes sense in some sense because the senses are the data, you know, and understanding is the processing of the data. And what you're ended with, it's like a baker creating a bread. It's like once the bread is made, you have a reason, you know. So I could see how Immanuel Kant says there's nothing higher than reason because we have to see the max ability of the human being. And so what it means is after you have experienced something, and you have processed it, which means assimilated in regards to your contextual and conceptual existence, you know? Anyways, Immanuel Kant says experience without theory is blind, but theory without experience is mere intellectual play. Immanuel Kant says always recognize that human individuals are ends and do not use them as means to your end. Immanuel Kant says the only objects of practical reason are therefore those of good and evil, for by the former is meant an object necessarily desired according to a principle of reason, by the latter one necessarily shunned, also according to a principle of reason. Yeah, so he's saying, so Immanuel Kant in this quote, he's saying that there needs to be a sort of judgment to distinguish between good and evil, and that's reason. So reason even surpasses good and evil because it's seeing both of them in some sense. Or both of them good actions, there's a reason they're inspired, and bad actions that also have their reasons. But when he says reason here, he's talking about a level of focus, precision, and concentration to the nature of what really something means in regards to understanding. So I believe Immanuel Kant here, when he says reason, he's talking about the complete end result of understanding something. You know? Immanuel Kant says nothing is divine but what is agreeable to reason. Immanuel Kant says, act that your principle of action might safely be made a law for the whole world. Oh, this one's interesting. Act that your principle of action might safely be made a law for the whole world. Which can be said to, in another way, just live honestly, I think. He says, it is beyond a doubt that all our knowledge begins with experience. Immanuel Kant says morality is not the doctrine of how we make ourselves happy, but how we may make ourselves worthy of happiness. Science is organized knowledge. Wisdom is organized life. Wow. This man just hit a home run. What that means is, guys, science is organizing what is becoming we are knowing, and wisdom is, in some sense, a sort of organization of all these organizations. It is how living is done. And the art of living, I've seen many human beings, in some sense, attempt the art of living. And when I say the art of living, I'm using it in my own context. That it, in some sense, uh, living, like not just existing in this life, but to actually live. And that living doesn't mean it's only expired from externally. You can't wait for the world to get you to get up from your chair. I'm going to continue with the quote tunnel, guys. I'm just going to read a few more. Immanuel Kant says a categorical imperative would be one which represented an action as objectively necessary in itself without reference to any other purpose. That makes sense because it is the category ideal. It is like the banner, so the banner can't be anything else. It is what it is. Immanuel Kant says metaphysics is a dark ocean without shores or lighthouse, strewn with many a philosophic wreck. Oh, incredible. That this is true, guys. The philosopher, many people think philosophers are, even though back in the day philosophers would sleep till like the afternoon, till like noon they would sleep. You know, they wouldn't wake up early on like certain um, mindsets back in the day. But the reason is that philosophers were willing to step into states of mind where there was less comfort so that they could see what really was happening in this life. I want you to imagine that your beliefs, your ideology as a person is a house you're in. And in this house, you're comfortable. I'm telling you, most people are comfortable in the beliefs that they claim. So it's as if you're in this house. Now, the philosopher is the one who's stepping out of this ideological habitat that the mind is in some sense adopting. And as the philosopher steps out beyond the beliefs of the reality, first of all, if you by nature have the courage to wander beyond, you are by nature. It's like in my books, at least, your mind has entertained philosophical visions. What does that mean? That means you have been willing as a conscious being, as a conscious moment of being, to wander about beyond the framework of your conscious existence. And that's not easy, guys. I say mysticism, these by nature kind of like these talks are mystical. Therefore, in some sense, they're suggesting they're trying to take the attention of the human being to the experiencer. Now, the thing is, society in modern civilization, especially for the next, I think, like 200 to 300 years, we can't just go, all of us become sort of like the drops can't all suddenly go into the ocean. That means the point of life is not enlightenment, it is enlightening response. And so, what I mean by that is that there is something in front of your eyes. The eyes have not opened in a world that's empty. It's a world that there is phenomena. That's one thing, guys, I'm grateful for as a being, that there is design. There's moments where I walk in, regardless of whether the day is good or bad. It's just existence is so fascinating in the various ways that expression is here, that I thought it's like all those people on the watching TV don't realize they're living inside a film. This film is your life. This is why filmmakers I consider them to the level of this may sound a bit too intense, but I consider certain filmmakers as divine people, right? Not divine people, divine minds. That means human beings who noticed there wasn't something and it could be, right? And their attempts made it come about. The whole point of reality, really, believe it or not, guys, existence is giving you a clue. You see, everything is born into existence, we say. You have been born, your parents have been born, the parents of your parents have been born, your lineage, everything that we use is like invented. Invention is when a sort of utility is born, you know, a sort of use is born. So if things are created, we have to get this clue that in order to, if there are, or if there may be greater dimensions, or this world is beyond, is more multidimensional than our thoughts, there comes the effort to create. So it's like I noticed that there's three dimensions in life the human being has to be able, and you need to have these three abilities. And if you don't, I find it becomes harder to pilot in existence. The first ability is the most important one. It is the ability to create. I'm going to tell you, let's start with this. Creation is evocation. Right now, as I'm speaking, it's not that I'm going over a list of thoughts to say. What's really, I mean, aside from the code tunnel, but I'm saying like the way I give these talks is about, it's like I ask a question that challenges my own mind. Like what they say, it's like, what's the best book to write? What's the best book to read? The one you're going to write, you know? So for me, if it surprises me, I say, okay, it could surprise others who perhaps have thought like me. So, anyways, the ability to evoke, to create, to know that it is okay to do something new. This idea, this the view leads to ability, creative ability. All those people who feel they're not creative, it's because internally there isn't authorization. They feel they're not allowed to be someone else. only when you can be someone else you will create something else. That means only when your mind has an ability to go beyond that point in the Shire where Frodo hadn't gone beyond. So creation is very crucial, right? For many, I find at least for many men, especially in modern societies, I find they're forgetting the honor that it's not it's like the creative spirit, the keeping a sort of creative level of existence alive, right? So this is also a pillar of civilization, this ideal of creativity. That means protect creativity wherever you see it. Any being who does something new, cherish it. As a species, cherish it, celebrate it. You know. So, anyways, there's the creative dimension, right? Things are being created. Things are coming out here out of nowhere into consciousness. Okay. Then we have stuff that enters consciousness and remains there, right? Remains in consciousness as well. So as life has began, it is also required to be maintained. So certain things enter your attention, your moment of conscious being for the first time. They're new things. All right. Now certain ideas arrive and then they stay. Do you know? And it's not that the idea stays, it's that you where your attention as a human, what your attention as a human being does with the content of your mind. There's an incredible level of self-inspiration that is required for internal inquiry of the other, the invisible other, you can say, or the witness with it. They're not the same, but anyways. So if you are comfortable with creation, the ultimate way you can become comfortable with creation, so think of it this way: things are being entering your moment, things are hanging around in your moment, and phenomenology is leaving your moment. If you as a being can have the same level of comfort you have with something entering a system, and the same level of comfort with something leaving the system, and the same level of comfort with how things are maintained in the system, technically by the definition of some books, you are beyond that dimension. So what that means is it's pretty much, this is like a sort of advice to I have to say the future to future generations who may be interested in multidimensional travel. Okay, that any dimension, it doesn't matter if you're that guy who just went into a portal thinking it was a bathroom. Yeah. That's so hilarious. Oh my god. The guy accidentally enters another dimension thinking it was the bathroom. Yeah. Contentment with the new, contentment with what has endured, contentment with the end, with the start, the middle, and the end of every reality's phenomenology. You see, the thing is, phenomenology is alive. This world is not like a snapshot photo. It's not like a portrait on a wall. It's living. It has dimensions, you know? Just the incredibleness of the dimensions of space. I remember kind of being introduced to this idea by Carl Sagan in one of his videos online where he said, he spoke about the flatlanders, these creatures living in two dimensions, and how if you put a cube on this table where all these two-dimensional beings are living, they'll be like, oh my god, a giant square appeared out of nowhere. So to their dimensional, it's like their dimensional ability to explain. um, it's like the two dimensions can't explain the three dimensions, so what is three-dimensional to a two-dimensional being is a miracle. What is fourth dimensional to a three-dimensional being is a miracle, and you can see the pattern go on. A sort of fractal relationship there. Um, Inevitably, either it's a crystallization of an individual archetype, or it is letting go of all weapons and tools of thought at one's disposal, and realizing that life can be a completely simple, experiential, and meaningless journey as well. And not that every moment needs to have mighty significance. You see, it's like I was always fascinated that warriors like had swords, and they would sheath their swords, and only when the time was required they would draw them. Do you see? So what that means is the sword gave the person an ability, so it was a culture of hidden ability. Even though the ability was savage, of course, human beings have used metal in the wrong way. Do you know? They have so many. It's like if you ask me what the biggest killer of human beings is, I will tell you metal, like steel or iron or whatever. Like metal has killed human beings a lot. A lot of metal has just killed human beings. Metal in the hands of other human beings. So somebody told me it was like World War One had like, what was it? I think I'm getting the number maybe close to the actual, but it's like 15 million deaths, and that was unseen of. That was more than all the wars in history so far recorded. You know, the deaths that happened in World War One. Then in World War Two, there were 50 million deaths. Do you know what that means, guys? That means the inefficiency of the civilization to hold stability on the surface of this planet led to the exiting of 50 million minds, and in 50 million deaths, you can say there must have been like a tiny percentage of geniuses in that 50 million. So the world has lost many. And the thing is that we are in, honestly, I don't want to I don't want to take the video game metaphor too far, but it honestly is like a video game. There's visuals. There is, in some sense, challenges. You do see you see levels to your reality. You, in some sense, have goals and objectives. There is an active mover. You can observe yourself in the mirror, just like how the person playing the video game is seeing the character from behind the character's head. If it's what is it, RPG or something? So the game is a metaphor for a simulated reality. And some people may say, Mr. Within, if the world, it's like, does the world need to all become philosophers? It's like, there's no such thing. It's like we put masks on our face and celebrate, but it's like, that's why I'm saying the wisest people are playful with language. Uh, Immanuel Kant, uh, I'm going to share this quote. I shared it, but I think this is said in another way. He says, live your life as though your every act were to become a universal law. That means be universally conscious. So right now we're just taking pride of our land. We're like, yo, I'm from this nation, and that other person's like, I'm from that nation, But imagine like so many years ahead, and then we become a galactic civilization. Suddenly we are introduced, we set up our own shop in the galactic context. We become an interstellar species. Think incredibly science fiction here. That there will come a point where we have to stop identifying with our limitations to be able to experience the limitless. Wow. Immanuel Kant has this, guys, I gotta share this. This is insane. He says if man makes himself a worm, he must not complain when he is trodden on. Wow, wow, wow. Immanuel Kant says immaturity is the incapacity to use one's intelligence without the guidance of another. Immanuel Kant says thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind. Ultimately, every human being is some sort of intelligent, energetic moment. Uh, and the eyes of every human being has a very strange value. That behind your eyes, there is more than one world you see, but in front of your eyes, you see only one world. When I close my eyes and I wonder what's in front of my eyes after I've closed them, if anything changes from the environment, my imagination will begin intervening. And when I say imagination, I don't separate like the mind. Your psyche is fragmented only if you have not realized all of time is happening in one moment. The fragmentation of the psyche means that there has to be a world for each of those fragmented psyches, you know, each psychological component. What that means is imagine we have this cake and we say this cake is the psychology of the human being. Now imagine this cake gets cut up into pieces. Okay, now I'm saying if the cake is not moved, in some sense it's like it's still the same cake, you know. It's still, the person realizes that the fragmentation of it is space and time is the knife that cuts this cake. So bakers must be going crazy right now. Yeah. Really, human beings, we are like the fragmented psyche of the species. We each have a psychological influence upon the environment. It's just that we are sculpting our own narratives, and when life gets hard, the person tends to escape. I mean, like, just it's like, I understand hard work, but when you touch, like when a child touches fire and experiences that burning sensation, then they won't touch it again. But hard work could sometimes be like you touch the fire and then keep trying to touch the fire, so the direction of the effort of one's life is as important as the effort, you know. Complexity could be said to be the addition of dimensions. Simplicity can be said to be the subtraction of dimensions. Now, inevitably, when all of reality appears as one dimension, how would you simplify one dimension so it's like one minus one, you come to the void? And when you come to the void, what is zero minus one? Nothing, but it doesn't mean that zero doesn't have a value. It just means the minus one cannot equate anything. It's like the void is so vast that it appears at most to many people as a mirror. So when you really study your subjective realm, you're going to notice how it's a reflection of how you look at it. The contents of your mind are being kept in value somehow in the moment. Imagine it's not just objects, right? Imagine you're not in just one physical room. Imagine, like, if you're in a room right now, imagine it's not just this room where there's stuff in it. Imagine there's also the mind's room where there is subjects lying around there. Some of these subjects are evoked through memories. Memories are evoked by how much that memory was directly experienced or how much indirectly. So really, your memory has to do with your concentration. It doesn't have to do with too much remembering. It just has to do with precision of design and attention. So the person who cares about design, well, guess what? The next room you enter, you're going to notice more designs, you know? So this ultimate reunion of consciousness, this return of the journey of a drop into an ocean, inevitably there's a species here that needs to be attended to. That means regardless of whatever psychological state of whatever heavenly state of mind is it acknowledged, it's like after you've seen heaven, you'll see why you're on earth. After you see non-dual presence, you'll notice the value of individual living. You see, this is why the ego, some people thought it was just a bad thing. No, the ego, there's something called a divine ego. Okay, which what it means is that the thought is being moved by the experiencer is moving first, then the thought, rather than thoughts moving the experiencer. Thoughts are subjects of experience, subjects being observed by the experiencer. Reality is objects being observed by the experiencer. The experiencer, well, here, Marcus Aurelius said the soul is dyed with the color of its thoughts, therefore the soul doesn't have a color. Consciousness is not like, you can't go to somebody else who's just like waiting at the bus stop and be like, yo, I have more consciousness than you. It's like, it's like, I exist more than you. Ha ha. I'm just trying to prove a point here, guys, that existentially there's an equality in experience. So if we wanted on an existential level to see all of our intelligence, anybody who's awake, you have the same intelligence. Now, while you're awake, how much you see from your moment. Now, that has to do with how much you have comprehended. What is this that is your eyes? What is your sight? And you see I considered this, the inferior philosopher reacts to his thoughts. He lets his emotions direct him. Sometimes it's like when you don't know what to do with a thought, and emotion comes and guides the moment. You see, so when we get to a point where we are observing our objective dimension, objective realm, where we are observing our subjective realm, where emotions aren't technically a realm, but I'll say it, it's like, imagine you're also observing the emotional realm. Then attention is its own source. So imagine becoming the source of your own inspiration as a living phenomena. But this you is not an ideological you only. It is not even the ideological sense you have for the species. It is your honesty to actually be what you are by not resisting what you are. It's like, really, there's only two kind of instructions in life, you know? Trust and act. That's it. This doesn't mean there's no faculties of reason. This doesn't mean we don't wonder about understanding and what we're standing under. It means like, um, when you really comprehend your attention, it moves beyond an ideological domain. So imagine you looking in the mirror and for the first time realizing the dynamic movement of attention cannot be termed. When you can acknowledge the language threshold, then uh, as Hafez says, your heart and my heart are very, very old friends. What he means is there is a field where in that field individual consciousness is the recreate is the artwork of that field, you know. It's like there's a reality where bodies are projecting minds, and there's a reality where there's a field of mind projecting various particles, various particular movements, you know. Because the moment the world can be multidimensional, it means that our explanation, it gets limited. That means it's like, imagine there's many parallel realities. So which parallel reality do we look at? You know? So that's when the intuitive nature is required. The trust that the being, if it doesn't ideologically just analyze the moment, it can access the experiencer's instantaneous knowing. What that means is the particle in the field realizes that while the attention is in a particle, it is not the field. But as the attention moves beyond the particle, it is the field. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in, and it is now time for our species to explore its inner skies. Much blessings and namaste.